سيداتي سادتي، من فضلكم رحبوا معنا بالمحرر في بلومبيرج تي في إريك تشاسكر، وضيفه المدير التنفيذي في بي بي بوب دودلي.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Editor-at-Large Bloomberg TV Eric Schatzker and his guest, CEO of BP, Bob Dudley.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first say that, and I know I speak on Bob's behalf as well, that it is an honor for us as guests of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be here, and furthermore, to be here at the first Misk Global Forum. You people are here because you're the leaders of tomorrow. Now, I want to tell you something about tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be more challenging and more complicated than today. It's going to demand a great deal of its leaders, new skills and new capabilities. And you may sit there wondering to yourselves, what skills? What capabilities? You want to know? I want to know. That's why I'm delighted to be here with Bob Dudley, the CEO of BP, for a conversation that we've entitled Unpacking the Toolkit. Bob, as anyone who lives in this country, or for that matter, in this region already knows, these are challenging times for your industry, the oil industry. It has been and remains under a great deal of pressure. It's an industry in transition. So let's start by establishing some personal context for this conversation. The toolkit, effectively, that you've had to draw on. What's it been like running an oil company for the past couple of years? Tell us about the hurdles that you've had to confront as the landscape shifted, and how you have responded as a chief executive.
Well, thanks, Eric, and it's great to be here in the Kingdom as well, with so many future leaders in this room. It's quite inspiring. And as you talk about what it's been like in our industry, and there's no country in the world that's as involved in the oil and gas industry as Saudi Arabia. Can you imagine an industry where your product price drops in half in a year? You imagine that in any other industry where consumer prices, where you woke up and very quickly what you sell is half the value. And you have a cost structure, and you have people, organizations around that are living in $100 oil, and we're at 50. In fact, today we're at 44. So our industry, as countries around the world have had to do, is adjust very, very rapidly, painfully, quite frankly, but in the long term, maybe healthier because of it. So we've had to draw on all kinds of leadership, and people have to make decisions very, very quickly. This is not a time to sit around very quietly and carefully and hope that it's going to get better. As some people have said, hope is not a strategy. But we've also had our own overlay of problems as well that we've had to deal with at BP.
Like what, for example?
Well, some of you may know or heard of BP. It's a company that went through an event that shook the company to its core. It doesn't always work, this expression, in some cultures, but it effectively had a near-death experience. We did almost not survive after 2010. We had a large, tragic industrial accident in the United States, in the Gulf of Mexico, that has, and will cost our company $61 billion. So there's few companies, I think, in the world that could survive meeting obligations around that, legal fines, penalties, a huge legal bill in the United States. So we've had to deal with that, as well as the drop in the oil prices.
So let's consider for a moment those two challenges. Responding to what may be described as the most catastrophic accident ever in the oil industry. And then, subsequent to that, a precipitous drop in the oil price that challenged your company, and for that matter, every other in the business. In what capacity was BP most unprepared, and how did you recognize that?
I think the thing we were obviously unprepared for what was a very, very low probability accident. I think
Tail risk, effectively.
Tail risk, effectively. Very, very complicated. It was not sacrificing safety for profits. It was truly a very complicated industrial accident. But I think what we didn't prepare ourselves were the clock speed of the world, the focus that we had on us, the media attention, the instant need to communicate, to shore up confidence inside the company itself and the markets, deal with enormous political pressure overnight. And I think as an oil and gas company, we did our crisis response drills, but nothing prepared us for that.
Now, it's not all about the bad news. What about the pleasant surprises? I think that that's important for people to understand. What had BP done as a matter of good practice that only became obvious and obviously invaluable when confronted with these kinds of challenges?
Well, I think we had an incredibly dedicated workforce of all ages in the company. I think we dealt with it with values and integrity. We said, look, there's been a mistake, we're sorry, and here's what we're going to do about it, and we're going to effectively open up the checkbook to make good on our promises. And then communicated with, we didn't go into our shell with the media or with the political world, and I think that that helped. People saw we were trying and not running from the problem.
Now, already in the few minutes that we've been talking, some ingredients to good leadership are already coming through. The importance of communication, the relevance of values, the need for integrity. Tell me, Bob, because I think this is instructive, and not just to the audience for that matter, to me as well. What do you look for in a leader?
Well, we've been through these crises now for a while, and so it actually shifts people who have been through a crisis and those who don't. And you see leaders who do really well in a crisis that surprise you, and others you expect to do well that maybe don't handle it as well. So having gone through crises, you see leadership in a different way. So what I look for, what the company looks for, and we do have very written down leadership expectations, is first, calmness in a crisis. Measured calmness. We're in one of the longest wavelength investment cycles in the world, as is, say, Saudi Aramco and the other oil companies in the world. So we've got to take a long-term perspective. Because
in some cases, the investments that you make now aren't fully realized for decades.
That's right. Yeah, on average, I think we make an investment in an oil and gas field, there's no revenue for 7 years in the company. There's some a little bit earlier, not. So you have to try to look through political cycles, events in the world, and make these difficult decisions. But leadership is about, I like the terms of the conference here, which are, I think they are inspire, empower, and nurture. And that's not unlike what we expect from our leaders and people, to communicate and work with people, not tell people what to do, have the guidance and have the rich, I call it wisdom and judgment, is probably the single most important quality of a leader, but then inspire and nurture others as well.
What are some of the things that are written down in this, I'm presuming, a leadership handbook of sorts at BP?
Well, they start with values. So the first one is safety, as you can imagine. I mean, we almost didn't survive that accident. We have excellence. So that doesn't mean people that can calculate things down to the 10th decimal place, but excellent in what you do for the purpose that's needed. Courage is another one. We've been through tough times, so leaders have to have courage. Respect. It is vitally important for leaders in an organization, and even if you're not leading at that moment a team, to have respect for people around you, your partners, your stakeholders, governments, everything. Great respect, and then one team. It pulled the company together. So that's the foundation of it, the values. And then there's just a lot in there around common sense things. Emotional intelligence. I mean, we want people who are smart, but they have to be emotionally intelligent, and they have to, assets don't do anything on their own. They require people. And so the people have to run those and run it with emotional intelligence, maintain partnerships as well. So they have to get other people inspired to do other things in the company, and that's vital as a leader.
I'm glad you make the point that you do about assets, because clearly financial capital requires human capital to produce success, to produce a return, to produce profit. We hear a lot about human capital. And in some cases, leaders, CEOs included, pay lip service to the importance of human capital and how much time needs to be spent nurturing it. How much time do you figure of your typical work week or your typical work month do you spend on that issue?
Well, I spend a lot of time on succession planning deep into the organization. So that's one way, is looking and getting to know people in the company and making sure our leadership team knows people. So what are the qualities we need in those succession plans? Including diversity, people from all over the world, women and men. It's important to have a very diverse team. Yesterday, we took our entire management team in London to something called WeWork, which is the new generation of young people who come together who are forming startups. They work together in an environment. They work with different companies. But at BP, we took some space there, and we put some of our innovation centers in there and interns, and went over and saw them. We had to take our ties off. We didn't fit into the building. But it was, our management team tries to see what the millennial generation is like and how they think, and it is very, very different.
Does what you look for in a leader change by region? In other words, are some of the qualities more valuable in one part of the world than they are in another part of the world?
Yes. Cultures are different. They really are different. There are some places where it's more natural, aggressive personalities, maybe with respect, just don't work in Asia, for example. So you actually have to have managers who are culturally sensitive and have experiences in these places to be able to manage it right, because you will not get the same performance. If you do targeted selection interviewing for people for roles inside the company, and you try to get someone in China to tell you all the good things they've done, they just won't. So you have to realize that culturally it's different.
Without naming names, share with us an anecdote like that. I presume that you've come to some of these realizations through practical experience.
Well, I worked in China for a while, and I realized that people are very, very humble. And so trying to get them to tell you the good work they've done is not always easy. It's easier in North America, where people are very quick to list out all the things that they've done. I think language is subtle. I think leaders have to be very attuned to the language of regions and communicating. It isn't one size fits all. And I tell people inside of BP, remember, the majority of our employees, English is not their first language. So we've retooled how we communicate, much simpler, more direct, not complex language. And it's really enrolled, I think, more people in the company.
Do you think something is lost culturally in terms of communication and the capacity to convey EQ in the inescapable global effort, if you will, to make everybody communicate in English?
You do need a common language, and you need a common vocabulary about what you're talking about.
I say this, of course, here we are speaking in English.
Yeah, and speaking English, and you know, I know the difference, you know the difference even between English and American English is quite different. You do need that common language. I don't think that holds us back. We do interpret all of our communication and our big communications into 7 languages and put it out there written-wise.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do different regions produce different kinds of leaders?
Yes, they do. And there are different regions of the world where people are very global and are mobile and move around the world. And there's other places, great leaders, but they really don't want to move. So we have to take that into account. But I think as we've been through our crises, it's changed our entire company because we make decisions much faster now. We've had that experience where we've had to sell 1/3 of the company off in a very short period of time. And we've broken all the emotional bonds with projects, and people who worked on this or worked on that. It's a much faster paced culture that we have now.
Do you believe that those trials, I think we could use many, many, many different words to describe the kind of experiences that you've had as CEO of BP and your company has undergone, but have they made it a better company, a stronger company?
I think it has. By selling off a third of the company, we have a portfolio that we like. We have a set of leadership that is tested, and we're developing people all around the world who've been through that. So if there is any silver lining at all in that terrible accident, that would be it. The other thing we've realized, Eric, is we're all businesses. We all have shareholders. But we've come to the realization that we're not in the business of transactions. We are in the business of relationships, mutually beneficial relationships that go on a long time. Some of our partners today in countries where we operate are having difficulties. We flex because they're our partners. And then we've had our problems and they flex. And that's really important, I think, in this world today.
Here's one question that I suspect may be on the minds of people in the audience listening to our conversation today. Is leadership a constant, or will the challenges of the future demand a different kind of leadership?
I think there are constants to it. Emotional intelligence, cultural awareness. Leaders, I think, as we look for in our employees, have to have a part of self-motivation. It can't come from other people, it's got to come from within. So there's definitely some constants there. Integrity, values have to be a constant. But as the world changes in the digital age, and there's less roles and jobs, and people are not always working in one office altogether, there's going to be a need for leaders to make sure they connect what will be a different workplace going forward.
So, in addition to the ability to connect people who are, say, not working in a giant curtain wall office tower in London, for example, or perhaps here in Riyadh or in New York City or Hong Kong, that's one thing. What else? What's going to be more valuable to the leader of tomorrow than it is to the leader of today?
We just had a futurist come into BP, a guy named Ian Golden. It's quite remarkable to try to educate our leadership in the company around the mega trends that are out there. And he made the comment that today is the slowest day of the rest of your life, that the pace of change is so fast. Leadership has to experiment a little bit, but it has to see some of the changes happening faster. They'll happen to you. So we need people who are educated beyond just the oil and gas industry, people who are familiar with that pace of change, and we need people to understand the political landscape and be able to deal with it and work in it.
What's not going to be as valuable?
I think the command and control type leadership is just not going to work.
Needs to be more collaborative.
It's got to be more collaborative. And people need to not just manage up. People have to manage sideways and down in an organization to be successful. Because organizations now, there's so much communication, there's so much social media, even outside the company, on the company, and people inside the company, that you can see it. You can see what people think about working for your company now. And so being able to respond to that is really important. And that used to not be visible, I think, to the top management of companies.
Well, let's try to draw some historical comparisons. What skills or qualities do you think the BP that you joined are no longer relevant to the BP of Bob Dudley?
Well, there's a lot of skills that were technical skills, handwritten calculations and spreadsheets by hand, and all of that world, where you did have to understand the mechanics of it, is now automated. So I worry about that. Those skills aren't valued as much anymore. I do worry that people take technical output without the intuitive understanding of what it is. So there's a change there, and we're watching all this very closely. But I think the idea we're finding, and the young millennials who join the company, they don't necessarily want to have a career with the company. They want to come work here for a while if it's interesting, and they want to go do something else, or sometimes they may want to have two jobs at once. There's a whole different desire.
Is that an attribute?
it can be an attribute. If you're working in the innovation side of the business and you look at what's happening in our business, all kinds of fuels will be developed, more efficient fuels, the electrification of vehicles. What does it mean? What is the offers that we want to do with automation? Some people want to come in and just work on that problem. And then if you said, well, come work for BP, they said, I don't want to work for BP. I just want to be here as long as I enjoy this, but I'll probably go start my own company in 5 years. And they're very honest, and so they can make great strides with the company. We'd like them to stay, but they don't expect to today. It's really interesting.
Can you imagine thinking like that when you graduated from Thunderbird in 1979?
No. I wanted to go work in the oil and gas industry and see the world. And as long as I could see the world and do things, that was my interest.
Bob, over the years, I've made the observation occasionally in public, mostly to myself, that a great number of the most successful leaders in the corporate world didn't really study leadership. As I mentioned, you went to Thunderbird, you went to business school, but many CEOs didn't. Rex Tillerson, for example, your peer at ExxonMobil, comes to mind. He got a doctorate in engineering. Jess Staley, the CEO of Barclays, the British bank, has a bachelor's degree in economics. And Mark Zuckerberg, quite famously, dropped out of Harvard. It has made me wonder, is leadership a set of inherited traits? Or can it be taught? And if it can be taught, what's most important to teach?
I think it's both. I think there's some inherent sense of being a leader, a little bit comfortable being a leader that's important. But I think the wrong thing...
The kind of thing that you can see when kids are playing in the, in the playground?
A little bit. Yeah, it doesn't mean they have to be extroverts or whatever. I think that a lot of it, I mean, my own experience is I don't think I could be a leader if I hadn't done so many different jobs inside the company to have the confidence of knowing what went inside this industry. And I think it's the wrong thing for someone to join a company or a job with the objective of being a leader or the CEO. I think I think it comes with experience and circumstances. But we work a lot with our leadership. We bring them together. We have a structured program at times to talk about the new world, the need for relationship building, the awareness around the world, the political side of things, the trends with young people coming into the company so they don't get disconnected. And what I've seen is usually it's quiet confidence. You have to be really comfortable with yourself. The leaders in our company, it just feels natural. You can see sometimes when people force it, being a leader. But quiet confidence and then experience, people just naturally rise up.
What about the importance of cross-training? You talked about these millennials who perhaps might like to work more than one job at the same time and envision a career in which they've done many, many different things for many, many different companies. Is it important for a company like yours to try and replicate that range of experience inside BP?
Some of it. I mean, again, that long wavelength of investment cycle. We actually do feel like we're a family in the company. We've had to shrink in size. I think there's a great sense of, it's really empowering when you have a loyal workforce that really is not there temporarily. In the innovation side, the fast-moving consumer developments, there's room for that. And of course, really good ones we'd like to convince to stay with us. But I think in an industry like oil and gas, say Saudi Aramco is another one, I think there is something to having people who have got lots of experience in big companies come up in it.
Where have you had the most success recruiting new leaders, and why?
We recruit from all over the world, and I just had a review of our latest the group of recruits, and we hired quite a bit from Europe, and we have people that speak 6, 7 languages. They're remarkable backgrounds. And of course, they've gone through lots of time with people, and they actually have the communication skills and the enthusiasm. And I'm a big believer that nothing great was ever accomplished without enthusiasm. So young people with enthusiasm can just move the world. But we purposely hire Asia, North America, Europe, Africa, the Middle East.
Is that one of the things that you look for? I can't imagine too many resumes cross your desk any longer. They've presumably... Oh, there's a drone.
I hope he's friendly.
Me too. But let's just say Bob Dudley looks at a resume. Is that one of the things that you're looking for, language skills?
I think at least a second language is important.
Okay.
A lot of it is people who have traveled intentionally of their own desire, and we want to
In
give
their
people,
work experience.
in their work experience or in their university experiences. There's a lot of university students who have studied in various countries. I think we scared him away.
He'll be back.
Yep.
But that's highly instructive. What else do you look for? I mean, I'm trying to put myself in the position of, say, anybody in this audience. And I'm a young person, and I'm trying to build a resume, and I'm trying to turn myself not just into a leader, but somebody who has marketable skills, somebody who's going to be attractive to a prospective employer. So at least one additional language beyond my native tongue helps. A variety of experience in education and perhaps in the working world across geographies. What else would you add to the list?
So we've done, we just, in this, we have a group people committee. We sit down once a month and go through all kinds of issues. And one of them was the tracks of which we're hiring people. And one is a more traditional track from universities around the world. But the second one we've done is, is a company, I think it's in Europe, where people self put themselves forward through this company who looks at sort of innovation and new ways of doing things in kind of spirit of this new world of millennials. And the company screens and gives us, without the university process, resumes out of that. And unconventional stuff. And so we've been hiring both. So it's
and you
not
found
just one
people there
way.
that you like?
Well, there's a group of them yesterday I met. They were the ones that said they love working here, they're excited about this problem, and they're fast-paced about it, and then said, well, would you like to work with BP? And this very intelligent, technical background, a woman from Brazil who'd worked in Belgium and worked in another place. She said, I love what I'm doing here, but in 5 years I want to start my own company. But that's okay. That's all right.
More broadly, beyond just leadership, where would you say the most acute skills shortages are in the oil and gas industry?
Well, there's no doubt with the younger next waves of people coming in, there is a shortage in the often used STEM disciplines.
Science, technology, engineering, and math?
Yes, science, technology, engineering, and math. We need to get more people involved in that at younger ages. We need to get more women who are very capable of this. And I think by the time you're in 16 or 17, it's kind of too late. We need to get people excited about these disciplines when they're 12 and 13. And women need confidence that they can do this well. Some of the great engineers in BP who are, and there's a shortage of them, in my view.
What about coding? We hear a lot about the importance of coding. Do you think of coding the same way you think of, say, a second language?
I think for us, we need to use big data in a different way. I don't know as we have to do the coding for that, but we need to be able to.
So not everybody needs to know how to code.
Not everybody needs to know how to code.
Because some companies will tell you that.
I think for us, we have partners in other companies where they'll do that. We work with some of the big companies. Joe Kaiser was here earlier, Siemens and GE, for example. Sensors all over what we're doing. But our ability of our engineers to look at the big data and sort through it, working with these programs done by others, is a remarkable thing. And it's cutting down the cycle time on projects very quickly.
Stakeholders has become a very fashionable word, in management and governance schools. BP, of course, found out in a hurry that it had a lot of stakeholders after the Gulf of Mexico disaster, perhaps many that you didn't know you had.
Lots of them.
How sensitive do leaders need to be to stakeholders? Or is running a company well the best way to address all stakeholder issues?
I think if you run the company well, it's not enough. I think in this world today, stakeholders are really important. It's a word I don't like because it sounds like corporate speak. But I think of stakeholders are your shareholders, your own employees, your partners, the companies that we partner with around the world in many cases. And in oil and gas, it's always on the strategic radar of countries that have the work and the resources. So stakeholders include governments where you work. You cannot run the company well and ignore the fact that you have the privilege and responsibility of shepherding the resources. Communities, absolutely, where we work. And the pace and investor relations. The pace of this is really fast. And so and in big companies like BP, I have a board to manage as well, or the board manages the management. I'm not sure, but all these things means that the role of leadership is in multi-directions.
Have you done anything specifically to change the way stakeholders, more broadly speaking, think of you as a leader and think of BP?
Well, I think we've had to do a lot of advertising to improve our image and brand in the United States because it's suffered greatly. But I think in the places we operate, I'll give you an example in Tengu, in the island of Papua, where we built a big LNG plant.
In New Guinea.
In New Guinea. We have essentially, it's in the Indonesian side, we've essentially gone into with the communities there. We've helped eradicate malaria. We've taken the power that comes out of the plants and electrified villages all over the area. We've helped them set up markets for fishing and
so showed them that it's important. It demonstrated that a company can do more than just employ people.
Put hospitals in place and have doubled the number of years that people are going to school in this region. And it just it's great because you see a community transformed by it.
Bob, to conclude, if there's one piece of advice you could offer these leaders of tomorrow gathered before us, what would it be?
Be enthusiastic. Be really enthusiastic. Be patient. Really learn what you want to do. And I think I would say, Eric, it doesn't have to be every day because there's good days and there's not some bad days, but you have to do what you really want to do and love doing.
Have to be passionate?
You have to be passionate about what you're doing. And you can work your way into that, but it won't be very long before you realize you're really passionate about this and changes. And that's what keeps the drive and the energy always there in the spirit.
Terrific. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Bob Dudley of BP.